And Richard Schnatterly writes in with a great question about buying a smartphone from overseas and using it here in the United States. And he's looking at a few phones, probably at GearBest or some other site, and those phones say they support the 2100 megahertz band. So why wouldn't that work with AT&T's LTE network? And unfortunately, it likely won't, even if it supports the right frequency, because you also have to look at the band numbers that it supports, and I'll show you what I mean by that right here. So here's a great example of a typical listing on GearBest. This is a really cool looking phone. You'd be the talk of the town walking around with this bezel-less phone that you got for $160 with 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of storage. What a deal. But it won't work on most cellular networks here in the US. Now, when you start going through the description for the product, usually they put these numbers up in front of you first, and you can see here it supports a lot of different frequencies at LTE. However, there's more to the story than just the frequencies. You got to look for the bands that it supports. So as you go further down the description page here, you'll see that this Blue Boo phone supports band 1, band 20, band 3, and band 38 at these different frequencies. Now what I did is I went over to Wikipedia, and they've got a great chart that shows you each of the major US carriers and the frequencies and the bands that they support on their particular networks. And what we can do with this chart is match it up to what we have with the listing here from GearBest. So if we take a look at AT&T and the frequencies and bands it supports, none of them will match up with what we have down here on the list. So this thing will not even be able to make a phone call here in the US, let alone use data, unless, of course, you connect this thing up to Wi-Fi or something like that. What I found here is the only network this phone will work with is T-Mobile at 2G speed. So right now in the US, T-Mobile 1900 megahertz GSM is supported on this phone. So you can make a phone call with T-Mobile on their 2G network, but you won't be able to use any data. Your only hope here is to connect it up with Wi-Fi. So when you are shopping for a phone, go in and look at all the bands that it supports, because there's a good chance when you go to this chart here, it is not going to work with the carrier you're hoping to connect it with, at least if you're buying it from overseas.
This channel is brought to you by my Patreon supporters, including gold level supporters, the Black Eyed and Blues Music Hour podcast, Chris Allegretta, John Prawl, William Miller, and Charlie Walden. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/Patreon to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.